Today, I'm going to give you an update on the latest science with regards to the IgG4 antibodies that are seen in practically all of the mRNA vaccinated individuals. I used to provide reports on every single publication that came out on this, but then I stopped early in 2024, and today I'm going to give you an update on all of the entire 2024. So because the clear picture has emerged, and now I can just give you a summary of a few of these papers. Now, in 2024, there was, by my count, approximately 13 papers, additional supporting papers that came out on this concept that we're seeing these unusual IgG4 antibodies targeting spike protein in basically anyone who got mRNA vaccinated. And in total, up to the end of 2024, we probably can count approximately 23 such publications. This does not include anything that has already come out in 2025. And I can tell you there's already some literature already as well still coming out. So the body of evidence is rapidly building, showing what that is. All right, my name is Dr. Mikhail Rashek of Merogenomics, and let me give you the breakdown. So I'll just give you a few of my favorite topics from 2024, and they're not in any particular order, or they're not in chronological order. They're just basically, I'm just gonna give you the information. So I'll give you first one will be a study that came from United States. And that study confirmed, for example, that if you had 2 mRNA shots and you were not infected first, if you had 2 mRNA shots, any antigen exposure, whether that's additional vaccine, COVID vaccine, or infection, that would result in an increase of IgG4 antibodies. We've known this before, so this continues to confirm that. Also, that particular paper showed that effector functions might be inhibited because of these IgG4 antibodies. Now, let me explain what that means. Effector functions are your immunological responses that basically can use antibodies in order to destroy what antibodies are targeting. So of course, we all know we produce antibodies. These antibodies will target the virus, right? This is why everyone was getting vaccinated. But what happens afterwards? Once these antibodies attach to the pathogen, well, then immune cells can come in, for example, and start destroying that target. That's number one. Number two, you can also, complement system can come in. What is that? We have a bunch of proteins floating in our blood that can start arranging themselves in a specific manner by, for example, attaching themselves to these antibodies that targeting pathogen, and they can achieve a couple things. Number one, they can aggregate it, and number two, they can help the immune cells find these antibodies and target them. Complement system also does other things, but basically with reference to the antibodies, that's what we're talking about. And all of these functions are necessary for helping get rid of the pathogen and get rid of the disease, and they are all reduced or inhibited as a consequence of the increase of these IgG4 antibodies. Why is that? Is because that's the purpose of IgG4 antibodies, is that they do not participate in this process. The IgG4 antibodies are not as easily recognized as other types of antibodies, and this is why IgG4 antibodies can build something of a tolerance to what they are targeting. So that means if you are producing IgG4 antibodies against spike protein, which is what we're seeing in practically all of the mRNA vaccinated individuals, with some exceptions, then such individuals are in essence building immunological tolerance to the spike protein. So this is now, this was, I believe, fourth such publication supporting this. Now this is really important, and I can tell you that more and more scientists, as time goes on, are focusing on this. All right. And the last finding of this paper is my favorite. This is really the one that gave me a lot of hope. They also looked at people who were vaccinated 3 times. They had 3 different mRNA shots and never got infected either before or after. And the reason why that why I was excited about this is because they show that these individuals eventually, within say 6 months, their antibodies, IgG4 antibodies, were dropping. Now there is still a big question how rapidly these IgG4s might disappear. They appear to be continuous to persist for very, very long time, but that's because, as I already just told you a second ago, any antigen exposure, once you were mRNA vaccinated, even if it's just an infection, will reignite the production of these IgG4 antibodies. But if you don't have any exposure, at least this is hopeful that over time such antibodies could be reduced. And the reason why this hope is because we're still not exactly sure what is the clinical role, what are the clinical outcomes for mRNA vaccinated individuals down the road, but we'll talk about this in a second. All right, we're gonna move on. Next paper is a paper from China. The reason why I want to mention this one is because this is the first paper that showed that other type of vaccine besides mRNA shots could be inducing IgG4 antibodies. What they did use is they used inactivated virus vaccine. Basically, they took SARS-CoV-2 virus and they inactivated, meaning that virus could no longer replicate if it was introduced into your body. So then, and therefore it acts as a vaccine. And they were able to show that when they use such vaccine, they were also observing elevated production of IgG4 antibodies. I can tell you that up to now, approximately 10 different vaccines have already been, COVID-19 vaccines have been tested for whether they can induce IgG4 antibodies or not. And this is only the second one besides mRNA shots, which includes both the Moderna and Pfizer, that might be inducing IgG4 antibodies. This is important because that starts to give scientists potential clues as to what exactly is causing this. And most likely, in my opinion, this will be determined later on, as most likely it's the amount of antigen exposure. All right, we're gonna move on. The next paper is a paper from Germany, and it was a second paper that investigated IgG4 antibodies in children. And in this case, they confirmed prior finding that children after only 2 mRNA shots, also produce these IgG4 antibodies. We've seen this before, and I've covered that in one of the videos. Here, in this case, all of these children also had a breakthrough infection, so they also got infected after they got shots, and as a consequence, these IgG4 antibodies were elevated up to a year in these kids. All right, so moving on, another paper from Germany. These guys, they built another inactivated vaccine, but this was a vector vaccine. What I mean by vector, meaning that it was different virus than SARS-CoV-2, but that they used that as a vehicle to deliver genetic material for spike protein production. And they were able to show that people who took 2 shots of that type of vaccine, followed by 2 mRNA shots, they were protected from IgG4 antibodies. However, when they used 1 shot of the adenovirus vector vaccine, the one that was built by Oxford and AstraZeneca, then followed by 2 mRNA shots, there was no protection. Basically, at that point, eventually those people also ended up producing IgG4 antibodies. So it really comes down to it starts to appear that it really comes down to how many mRNA shots an individual had before, whether there is a protection or not. So, they confirmed as well that basically, once you had your 2 mRNA shots, whatever antigen exposure you had afterwards, you ended up elevating those IgG4 antibodies. Now, next paper that I'm going to mention was my favorite. It was from Netherlands, and these guys showed some really important findings. And so, first of all, they wanted to see whether, specifically, they wanted to focus on elderly individuals to see whether these IgG4 antibodies rise is any different in elderly individuals as opposed to other age groups, because the older you get, your immune system also changes with age and it can respond differently than if you're a younger person. And basically the take-home message was that yes, elderly also produce these IgG4 antibodies, and in fact they appear to be even more susceptible than the younger age groups. And they showed this. However, the younger age groups, they only had people who took up to 3 different mRNA shots, versus with the elderly group, they had people who took up to 5 mRNA shots. And when they're comparing the first 3 effects on IgG4 antibodies after the first 3 shots between both the young and the elderly group, they show that the elderly group was producing more IgG4 antibodies. The only difference is that those younger people, they all had Pfizer shots, versus the older group, they had 2 Pfizer shots followed by Moderna. Pretty much almost everyone in that in their study group had Moderna shot as a 3rd shot, and that might influence whether there's the reason why they saw higher levels of the IgG4 antibodies. So in other words, this would be a 3rd study that corroborated the fact that likely if you had Moderna mRNA shot, you are more likely to produce IgG4 antibodies than after the Pfizer shot. Now, what else they showed that is very important is that if you were infected prior to taking mRNA shots, then you are protected from production of these IgG4 antibodies. They clearly show that with the elderly group as well. However, and this is the first of its kind that we're seeing this, is that those elderly people, if they continue taking mRNA shots, and they studied people up to 5 different mRNA injections, eventually that protection wanes and these individuals start to produce IgG4 antibodies as well, but at much reduced levels still than in comparison to the people who never been infected prior to being vaccinated with mRNA shots. Okay, so very important information showing that, you know what, if you continue taking mRNA shots, eventually that protection can be broken through. And the one more finding that these guys also showed, this would be now the 5th paper that, oh, and by the way, in terms of this protection of infection prior to vaccination with mRNA shots from producing IgG4 antibodies, this would be now the at least 6th paper that we know that shows that this protection exists in place. So you can see how evidence is slowly stacking up. Then the last thing is, this is the 5th paper that once again showed that the effector functions are being reduced. Again, remember, this is basically the clearance of the antibodies that are coating the pathogen. That is also being reduced. And they ask the question, these authors ask the questions, well, are these IgG4 antibodies good or bad for an individual in the mRNA vaccinated individuals? Because that is an outstanding dilemma in a scientific circle. Because on the one hand, we all know that we need these effector functions in place in order to clear out the infection, right? So if they are reduced and these IgG4 antibodies are somewhat getting in the way, then that could be a problem, because it means you could be persistently infected with, say, spike protein, right? So that could be an issue. But on the other hand, they are coating the spike protein, so they're preventing the spike protein from doing its damage. So here's that question: is it good or is it bad? But remember, I did recently a video from a Yale study that investigated post-vaccination syndrome, people who develop a disease similar to long COVID soon after vaccination. And in that study, these authors observed something very unusual, that many of the people with post-vaccination syndrome had circulating spike protein in the blood, and yet they had lower anti-spike protein antibodies than people who did not have circulating spike protein in the blood. And that's a conundrum. That's supposed to be the other way around. And this is perhaps could be a hint that IgG4 antibodies could be hiding the spike protein from the immune system in order for the immune system to actually produce antibodies against it. So this is where we still have to figure that out. All right, and there's one more study I want to tell you, which was one that really intrigued me. It's from US, from Harvard. And specifically what these guys did is they looked at influence of vaccinating both with COVID vaccine as well as influenza. And they basically took people who were already vaccinated with a bivalent COVID vaccine. So basically they had to have at least 2 vaccines before, possibly 3. Bivalent was the 4th shot that was being marketed to the population at the time, from memory, I believe. And basically what they studied is 2 things. They studied people who took the COVID shot followed by influenza shot, but within few weeks, not at the same time, versus those who took the shots at the same time. And what they observed is that obviously, because these are mRNA vaccinated individuals who have been vaccinated multiple times, they had IgG4 antibodies. So that's not a surprise. They were able to see that, but they observed that those people who took the influenza shot at the same time, at the same moment as they were taking that bivalent COVID-19 shot, their IgG4 antibodies were reduced in comparison. And I thought that was really interesting. They also showed this figure where they showed the percentages of IgG4 antibodies, and you can see that those people who had influenza shot, say within few weeks after the COVID shot, they had high levels of IgG4 antibodies targeting spike protein out of all of the different subtypes. And it could be even almost half of all of the antibodies targeting spike protein would have been of the IgG4 subtype. But those who took the influenza shot at the same time, for whatever reason, their levels of IgG4 antibodies targeting spike protein was dramatically reduced. Now, the reason dramatically, it was a lot different. You can see that easily from the graphs there. Now, the reason why I find this so fascinating, because I hope we're going to now look into this, scientists will look into this in greater detail. Could potentially influenza shots help reduce these IgG4 antibodies against the spike protein in the mRNA vaccinated individuals, if it were to turn out down the road that these are dangerous clinically for those who have been mRNA vaccinated. All right, so then basically this is my wrap up for 2024. Then the next future installments on the IgG4 sagas and the mRNA vaccinated, I'll be already looking at the studies that are coming out in 2025. One more thing that I'm gonna say is that please share, like the video, please comment, that's how we grow, but also check out my Patreon account. If you are willing to become a Patreon supporter, then you get to see all of these videos before they come out on YouTube, and you get to decide as to what comes out on YouTube. So then you have that input as well, and how the channel grows, and also more and more frequently, it's the audience that also has an input as to what kind of information is being studied. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.